Hello, everyone. My name is Aditya Karanam, and I am the outreach coordinator at the organization called Animal Ethics. And I'm very happy to be presenting you today this novel and upcoming topic on wild animal welfare advocacy. Uh, so I'll quickly just share my screen. Um, I think you should be able to see my screen. Um, Amazing. Okay. So, like I mentioned, this is a very uh, upcoming topic. It's still very neglected in the animal advocacy space, but it's extremely important for animal advocates to be aware of it, even more so in India as well. So, I will be covering an entire spectrum of things, including an introduction to animal ethics and wild animal suffering, followed by how we can make progress on this issue and why it's relevant for India. So to start off, I would request you to please scan this form, which is like an initial survey to understand what do you currently think about wild animal welfare. And I will also have a second form at the end of the session where we will try to analyze what has changed during this presentation about the ideas that I will present. And then we can compare how you update your ideas. All right. So moving on to just briefly present to you the structure of today's talk. We will have a brief introduction to animal ethics because I'm aware some of you are new to this topic. And then I will also talk about this phenomenon or this capacity called sentience and why it matters to this whole discussion. And then I will briefly present to you the situation of animals in the wild and we'll connect a little bit about how it is relevant to India. Finally, we will also look at what can be actually done about this issue and what animal ethics is doing to address this issue. Um, I'm aware most of you watching here are already animal advocates, so you must be aware of this. But what does one actually mean by speciesism? Um, we all know that it is a form of discrimination akin to other forms of discrimination like racism or sexism or classism or casteism, where we discriminate against individuals based on arbitrary criteria, unjustified criteria. So speciesism similarly is discriminating against individuals based on their species membership, based on which species they born into. However, there are different forms of speciesism. Speciesism is not just among humans and animals. Uh, there are, of course, different forms of speciesism. The main one, like I just mentioned, is anthropocentrism, which is the view that the interests of humans counts for much more than equally strong interests of other animals. So even if it is not equal, like say a trivial pleasure for a human in having like a 5 minute meal, which is not even necessary, might count, might be counted for much more than the interest of an animal in not suffering for her entire life in a battery cage, or an animal in not being experimented upon with harmful chemicals for trivial pleasures of cosmetics and stuff. So this is one dominant form of speciesism that is prevalent in today's society. However, like I mentioned, it's not just discrimination between humans and animals, it's also between two different animals. So, what other forms are there? So, one could be for aesthetic reasons. The animals that we consider cute or aesthetic in some sense are given more consideration than animals that are not considered aesthetic. For example, a panda, which is considered cute, or a puppy versus an animal that's considered ugly, like a cockroach or a rat, by mainstream society. They are not ugly from like an objective lens, of course, but it's just because we consider some species to be aesthetic versus some not, we treat them differentially, which is unjustified. And two, for scientific purposes, animals that are considered conservation valuable from a conservationist lens or scientifically valuable are given more consideration, like keystone species like tigers or larger carnivores, compared to animals that are not considered scientifically valuable. Say, for example, animals that are categorized under vermin, which is also a species term, to like, for example, wild boars, crows, etc. And then the third example is of size. The animals that are larger in their size are more visible or more easier to empathize, and for some reasons are given more consideration. Whereas the majority of animals that exist today are smaller animals, and they are not given due consideration because they are smaller, harder to empathize with, less visible, etc. Now, when I talk about speciesism being wrong, the defenders of speciesism as a prejudice provide a few arguments. I will present a few of them today and show how we can respond to it. So they argue that only humans should be respected simply because we have complex intellectual capacities, uh, we are more sophisticated in our intelligence, etc. We have a special relationship of solidarity or sympathy with other humans, which we don't share with animals. And three, the argument from might, which is humans are more powerful and hence we can dominate and cause harm to animals. Let us look at why this doesn't hold up under scrutiny, why these arguments fail. So the common perspective that humans have is that, oh, all humans are on this side of the line and all non-human animals are on the other side of the line. And so there's this line that's separating humans from non-humans. But is that truly the case? Because there are humans that are not as intelligent as other humans, like babies or cognitively challenged humans. There are people whom we don't share a special relationship with, for example, orphans or people who are away in the war zone or in other regions, but even if they are suffering, we would still extend moral consideration to them, even if we don't have a special relationship with them. And also, we would not use the argument from power to cause suffering to other humans who are less powerful, like babies, etc. So, if we are not comfortable extending the conclusion, which is that we are okay with causing harm to humans who are less powerful or who are less intelligent, then we should also extend the same consideration to animals if they lack those capacities. So the only way to avoid that is to divide this line and to say that we will not accept discriminating against non-humans based on these objections. And that is not what is relevant, which is intelligence is not relevant, special relationship is not relevant, and how powerful humans are is not relevant. So, what is actually relevant? So, we argue that what is relevant is sentience. What do I mean when I say sentience? In essence, it means to have the capacity to have positive and negative experiences. Positive experiences like joy, happiness, and negative experiences like suffering, pain, and grief, etc. So, this is what I mean when I say sentience. So, for an organism to be sentient, it needs to be conscious, it needs to have subjective experiences, which is it feels like something to be conscious, which is to experience colors, to experience things subjectively. And then on top of that, we are sentient, which is we can have positive experiences or negative experiences. Now, uh, while most of us might intuitively feel that animals are sentient, there's a huge community out there that is skeptical of some animals being sentient. So it's useful to just look at what are the indicators of sentience. How do we know that someone is sentient? One, we take a look at their physiology. We take a look at their biological characteristics. For example, we as humans, how do I know that another human is conscious? So I know that if I lacked a nervous system and a brain, I would not experience anything. So I would look at this other human and I would see that they also have a centralized nervous system and a brain. Based on the current scientific consensus, we need some level of centralization of a structure like nervous system to experience things. So I know that another human has it too, so they might be conscious. And we also know that many animals have it too. Like mammals have a centralized nervous system. Birds have a centralized nervous system. Until 1970s, it was thought that oh, birds are not conscious because they lack a prefrontal cortex. So in our brain, there are different structures, and there's a prefrontal cortex. Some birds lacked it, and so people were like, no, birds are not sentient because they lack it. But later it was discovered that they have alternative mechanisms to be conscious and they don't need prefrontal cortex. What they just need is a centralized nervous system and a brain. Similarly, there are other animals, like, for example, crabs and octopuses, they don't have a central nervous system per se, but what they have is ganglia. So just like nervous system, they also have a physiological structure which allows processing of information in a centralized form. And it's not just larger animals, like I mentioned, insects and arthropods. For example, honeybees also have a nervous system, which allows them to process the information and centralize it in the brain. Now, apart from biological and physical characteristics, what else would we look at? Apart from physiology, we would also look at their behavior. So, how do I know that another animal is conscious or is feeling pain? We would look at their behavior intuitively. So, we do know that animals exhibit a lot of complex behavior that allows for us to guess that they are sentient. For example, they show complex emotions such as grief and mourning, like elephants. When one of their herd members dies, they usually grieve and mourn and stand around the body for a pretty long time. There's, of course, behaviors of nourishing and care given to their offsprings, which would not be possible if they were not experiencing pleasure or suffering. There's also, affection, love for their conspecifics given among each other. And there's more nuanced experiments done to test if they're self-aware, if they're conscious, if they can recognize themselves. So this photo here is of a mirror test where a small dot was put on this cleaner wrasse, which is a fish species that likes cleaning itself. So they put a small dot on the cleaner wrasse, sorry, zebrafish, and they noticed the fish noticed in the reflection, oh, what is this other fish? And initially, she started feeling aggressive and showing aggressive behavior. But then she recognized that this reflection is moving on its own. Like whenever she moves, it moves. And then she realized that it's a self. How do we know that? Because they put a dot on this fish and she noticed the dot on her body in the reflection and she tried to rub it off, which means that she was able to model herself based on the reflection and understood that what she's seeing is a reflection of herself. This is only possible if there is some level of self awareness and sentience, of course. So, even animals like fishes have passed a mirror test. And of course, also insects, like there's been evidence of honeybees ex- uh, displaying complex behavior. For example, they do something called the waggle dance, where they try to communicate with the rest of the hive which direction is the food and how far it is by rotating a certain number of times. You can look it up. It's pretty interesting. And there's also other behaviors they show, like play behavior, where they just play around making balls of things, not for food, not for any purpose, but just for the sake of passing time and playing. And there's a lot of other research coming up in animal behavioral science and ethology that shows that animals do display behavior, which indicates that they are sentient. For example, snakes have also passed the mirror test. Like I showed the fish, she sees a reflection, whereas snakes, they are more olfactory, they smell. So there's also mirror test designed for them that they passed. As I mentioned, bees show play behavior, crabs show flexible decision making. Like if you give them a shock in one location for a shell, which is really big and good, but another shell, which is smaller, but there's no shock here, the crabs can choose where to go. And fruit flies show dynamic sleep patterns, which is an evidence of them possibly being sentient. They also have shown evidence of having PTSD-like behavior, which is also another example. And there's many more such evidence coming out that shows that they do show very complex behavior. There was in 2012 a group of prominent scientists who came together and signed a declaration called the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, where they said that humans are not unique in having the physiological and neurological substrate, neurobiological substrate that allows them to be conscious. Many animals, including some invertebrates, also possess that capacity. And more recently, I think in 2022 or 2023, there was also the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness, where again, a lot of experts came together and said that there's a strong scientific support of all mammals and birds being sentient. And there's also realistic possibility of invertebrates being sentient. And whenever possible, we should extend, when there's a realistic possibility, we should extend our consideration to them and avoid harming them. Now, how is this whole concept of animal advocacy and sentience and animal ethics relevant to India? We have been a key player in animal protection. If you had to rate all the countries there are and uh, their interest in protecting animals, India would be among the top countries. And why is this? Because we have a history of concern for animals from the time of Ashoka to Jains to indigenous tribes uh, to a lot of historical factors which show that there has been a rich history of concern for animal protection. Like I mentioned, Ashoka, during his time, he mandated banning animal sacrifice, infirmaries for injured animals, giving water to animals, etc. And there are some indigenous religions like Jainism, which also talks about the values of ahimsa and anicca, which extends to animals of not harming them and non-cruelty to them. Then there's many other indigenous tribes like Drokpa tribe, Araku tribe, Bishnoi tribe, and many others that talk about uh, not harming animals. And then, of course, this, in principle, at least, we are quite progressive as a country in extending legal protection for animals. In many judgments, there's been mentions of speciesism and dignities for animals, etc., like right to Article 21, and extending that to animals in some judgments. And there's also been personhood given to animals in some instance. Of course, this is all in principle and in theory, but one could also argue that we are slightly weaker in execution of these laws. But that's not to say that we do have, in principle, a strong legal protection. And of course, there's also a high rate of vegetarianism and plant-based diets in this country. But of course, it's due to multiple factors like socio-economic factors like casteism and religion, which also dictates them being vegetarian and not necessarily a concern for animal welfare. But we still have a huge vegetarian population in the country, which makes it easier for us to implement some forms of uh, food system changes. But that said, uh, there has been an increase in factory farming across India, whether it's of aquatic animals like fishes and shrimps or concentrated animal farming operations, whether it's for dairy or for hens. There have been growing number of institutions that are raising animals in these concentrated ways, which has been a recent growth since some revolutions like the white revolution, the silver revolution, the red revolution for meat, etc. So there have been these instances which has led to a growth of factory farming in the country, and growing number of animals are being farmed. Yeah, and now talking a little bit about the situation of animals and why it's important to take that into consideration. Of course, there's anthropogenic harm to animals, which is where we inflict harm to animals for our benefits, whether it's farming them for food, using them for experimenting for cosmetics, for clothing, for entertainment, etc. So we do harm them in many different ways. But we also do harm wild animals in many different ways. For example, hunting, where more than 1 million animals are killed every single year. And this happens for different reasons, right? This could be for pure entertainment, or it could also be due to human-animal conflict, where the animals come into human territories, they destroy the crops, or they just overpopulate and cause a lot of other problems. Um, so that could be one form of anthropogenic harm. But then we also cause harm to animals because they're being inconvenient to us. We cause harm in many harmful ways. For example, for rats, which are also a form of urban wild animal. We put sticky traps where they either get stuck, or we give very painful rat poisons, which cause them a lot of suffering before they end up dying. Another example of an anthropogenic harm in Australia, when it was being colonized, the Britishers bought uh, rabbits for purposes of hunting, and they just left them there. But then later, the population rabbits reproduced quite fast. So when their population started growing, they started affecting the local species that existed, and then they also started destroying the crops, etc. So now the government wanted to get rid of the rabbits. So what did they do? They artificially introduced this virus called Myxotomaxis, which affects them and causes very painful death in 12 days. And yeah, it's quite horrible. And there were vaccines available, but the government said, no, we don't want to treat it. We want them all to die. But then, due to natural selection, the rabbits were able to uh, gain immunity against this virus. But again, the government introduced the brain hemorrhagic fever to again cause them death. So these are just some examples of humans causing harm to animals. Um, but when I talk about the suffering of wild animals, most people immediately think about the harms that humans cause to wild animals. But if you look at the life of an animal in the wild, the majority of harms that the animals face in the wild is due to natural harms, not due to anthropogenic harms or harms caused by humans. They face harms naturally. So what are some examples? It could be due to the harsh climate, whether it's extreme cold, where these donkeys froze during the winter, or it could be extreme heat, where there's a drought and the animals also die of starvation and thirst. Um, and sometimes in the aquatic bodies, when the water dries up, all the aquatic animals that need water to survive end up dying. And it could also be due to natural disasters, for example, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods, cyclones, etc. It's not just humans that are affected, even animals are significantly affected. This is an example from the Kaziranga National Park in the northeast of India in Assam, where every year there's floods that happen, and many animals die each year during the floods. Some larger animals escape onto the mountains, but most slow animals, babies, small animals, they end up dying. And as I mentioned, when I say wild animals, I'm not only referring to animals that stay in the wilderness, it's also animals that stay in the agricultural areas and in urban areas, like urban wild animals like birds. They are also affected due to natural conditions, whether it's thirst, hunger, heat, etc. And animals also have tendencies to fight and conflict, whether it is for territory, for mating, uh, for defending against, defending their babies against harm. They usually fight with other animals. So, and when these fights happen, they are injured. And in the wild, there's no treatment that happens for them. And whenever they are injured, sometimes mortally, they end up painfully dying out of infected injuries. So these were just some examples like hunger, thirst, starvation, disasters, diseases, parasitism, etc. Now, why should one assume that there's a lot of suffering in the wild? So, there's two forms of reproduction of animals. One, they give birth to few offsprings, and they give a lot of care and parental protection. So these animals grow up to adulthood. For example, chimpanzees, the big apes like humans and gorillas, elephants, etc. So they give birth to few offsprings, and they give a lot of care so that these babies grow up to adulthood. But majority of animals in the wild, they give birth to a huge number of offsprings, out of which very few of them end up surviving to adulthood. Most of them end up dying when they are small and in painful ways. For example, turtles, they give birth to around 600 offsprings in a clutch, and very few of them end up surviving to adulthood. And most of them die due to uh, being eaten by predators, being affected by parasites, or hunger, or sometimes they get into conflicts, etc. Similarly, other smaller animals also reproduce in ways where they give birth to huge offsprings and very few survive. Frogs give birth to 10,000 offsprings, out of which less than 1,000, like this is a bullfrog, for example, gives to 10,000 offsprings, but 10,000 offsprings, out of which less than 1% survive to adulthood. And to the extent that the smaller uh, frogs are sentient, most of them end up coming into existence. They don't have a lot of opportunity to have positive experiences and joy. They mostly just suffer and die when they are small. And so they end up not having enough opportunity to live. And enjoy happy experiences. Sometimes when the water dries, all of them end up dying. And to the extent that the tadpoles are sentient, they come into existence, they suffer, and 99% of them die when they are young. Similarly, other animals like butterflies give birth to around 600 offsprings, and less than 10% survive to adulthood, and the 90% end up dying. So these are just some examples to show that most animals that come into existence, they don't live a long life, they live a short life. And even in that short life, they don't have a lot of positive experiences and then they suffer and die. This gives us a reason to assume that there's a lot of suffering in nature due to natural reasons and they deserve our help as well. Now, when I talk about this, most people say, but Aditya, I don't think it is possible for us to go out in the wild and help these animals because there are so many animals and people wouldn't care about them. So, to address that, I would say that humans are actually sometimes already helping animals in the wild. For example, when they are orphaned or they lose their parents or they're injured, some animals receive care in the rescue centers. Sometimes when they are orphaned, we see indigenous communities actually caring for them and breastfeeding them. For example, this is from the Bishnoi tribe. We also see examples of large-scale feeding programs like when animals there's a drought and animals don't have enough access to food. We see humans coming out and doing large-scale feeding programs for them. And as I mentioned, natural disasters, for example, forest fires, we've seen examples of humans going out of their way to provide food and nourishment and water to the animals that are affected by them. Not just animals on the land, also aquatic animals. Sometimes during tides, the animals get disoriented and get stuck on the shore. And sometimes communities come together and rescuers come together to get them back into the ocean, like, for example, with whales and dolphins, etc. Now, when I say this, some people say, well, Aditya, yeah, there are humans helping them. There are things that we could do. But yeah, it's the ecosystems are very complex. If we try to help one animal, won't it affect another animal? Do we know that all animals are conscious and sentient? Are they always suffering? And how can we responsibly try to help animals? So there are these uncertainties. And whenever there has been an uncertainty with any topic in human history, the best thing to do forward is to create a field of study and to research and to try to gain information on how best we can make progress on that problem. So, to address that, for wild animal suffering, we think we need to create a field of study called as welfare biology or wild animal welfare science that is a cross-disciplinary field that studies the welfare of animals living in the wild. Now, this is different from conservation biology or ecology, etc., because they look at species and ecosystems and biodiversity. But here we are looking at the suffering and well-being of every individual animal that stays in the wild. So welfare biology thinks about welfare, whereas these other fields, they think about ecosystems, biodiversity protection, etc., which are two different things. But this knowledge here can help us in understanding how to help animals in the wild because they study animals in the wild as well. So we can use that knowledge to allow us to make progress with welfare biology. Some more examples of large scale changes that could be done for animals. For example, I mentioned the Kaziranga National Park and the floods. So the government of Assam has tried to build these artificial highlands to protect the rhinos. But a lot of other wild animals are also being protected, like snakes and the smaller animals. So there's 12 kilometers of these raised highlands so that animals can escape from the flood water. And on these highlands, the government is trying to plant some food plants and also give medical care for animals that are diseased, etc. And then the other problem that I face is the other problem that I hear is people say that, oh, if we feed animals, then they will overpopulate and then they will suffer. So what we could do is alongside uh, giving them food, we could also have contraceptives and other fertility control measures so that we are able to control their population without harming them. And we can also give them food at the same time as fertility control so their population doesn't increase. So Barcelona is already trying it out, and there's other examples of in Oak Bay, the deer are given birth control, just like we do it for dogs in our cities. And I also mentioned diseases as another source of suffering. There's already research being done and things done to protect wild animals against diseases. For example, they were vaccinated against rabies, which allowed for large parts of North America and Europe to be free of rabies. They did this by putting the vaccines in these cookies and dropping them from the helicopter. And when the wild animals consumed them, they were vaccinated against rabies. So yeah, these were just some examples of things that could be done. And in India, we definitely need that. For example, we have a lot of human-animal conflict, and there's a lot of animals in the wild in the forested areas, also in the non-forested areas. So we are a huge country and we have a huge population of wild animals. And as I mentioned, they suffer a lot, both due to natural reasons as well as due to human-caused harms. And because they are sentient and because we reject speciesism, we should extend moral consideration to them and try to help them. Rejecting speciesism does not only mean avoiding harming animals, but it also means trying to help them whenever we can. So, what else can be done? The first thing I would encourage you to do is try to educate yourself about this issue. So, I would highly encourage you to check out our wild animal suffering section, where you will see a lot of information if you're interested in learning about this topic. You can just go to animalethics.org. And then there are other organizations working on this if you're interested in volunteering or supporting them or donating to them. So there's Animal Ethics, Wild Animal Initiative, Rethink Priorities, and New York University Wild Animal Welfare Program. And as I mentioned, wild animal welfare is a very neglected issue if you look at funding going to other groups of animals. For companion animals, it's 5 billion. For farmed animals, it's 200 million. And for wild animals, for wild animal welfare, it's, yeah, only 5 million. And some people are very skeptical if scientists and researchers would want to work on this. So we did a survey and we tried to survey different academics to understand if they would be interested. And we did this from different countries. And yeah, this is from the scholars and that is for the students. And we found that people are actually interested in researching on wild animal welfare. So the three top areas that they're interested, vaccinating wild animals against diseases, helping urban wild animals, and three, helping animals during weather events like cyclones or rains or heat, etc. So, or forest fires. So these were the three areas that they were interested in. Right now, the focus should be on doing more research, gaining more awareness about this issue among the public, and also getting more attention to this topic. Once we have more and more people talking about this, then we can do better things to help animals in the wild. And because I know that a lot of you watching here are Hindi speaking audience, we have recently released a Hindi video course on wild animal suffering, which is available on our YouTube channel. If you just type animal ethics, you can see our course on Jangli Janwaron ki Peeda ka Parichay. And we cover all of these topics in much more depth. And I think you would highly enjoy it. We would be very happy if you could go and check out these videos and learn about this issue. And if you prefer English, then we also have an English wild animal suffering video course where you can learn about this. And if you're interested in reading more about this on our website in the download section, you can find a link to the book, which is an introduction to all of these topics. And then additionally, I also want to just share about the documentary that we've released about sentience of aquatic animals, and the name of the documentary is Scientience. You can find it on our YouTube channel on Animal Ethics. It's a very interesting documentary. It's for 26-ish minutes, and I would highly encourage that you watch it. And if you're interested in supporting us and staying updated about our activities, you can just scan this and sign up for our newsletter, and you will be updated, but with all the activities that we are trying to do. That's mostly it. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I would be very happy to answer any questions. You can reach out to me on my email ID, which is aditya.sk@animalethics.org. And I would be very happy to guide you and to answer questions. Yeah, thank you. And finally, please don't forget to scan the final survey form and share your responses. For which is, I want to understand how did your attitudes change after this talk. So if you could please scan this and let us know about how you felt about it, that would be very helpful. Yes, thank you very much for your time, and I hope some of you decide to work on this issue and spread awareness about wild animal suffering among your friends and family. Thank you.